like something broke through this wall. Maybe it's something like a gutter man, or maybe even a new enemy. But with that, I'm finally free. Hey, I'm back. And this time, neither hand has actually gotten hurt. Of course, at least the time of this part of the scripting. But anyways, this is part 3 of the Fraud Saga. This saga, so to speak, will be put in the description if you want to check it out. And another thing is that I promised that I would dress up as Mirage at 300 subscribers. And since then, that goal has been met. And as of a few hours ago, that is the time that I'm writing the script, of course. That video is out. So if you want to go watch that, then I'll put that in the video description as well. And finally, the person that made the Mirage bet before, Cade, has finally made a deal that will hurt him rather than me. So if you guys want to see Cade, the Wash ULTRAKILL player, doing a 100% run, then you can go subscribe to him too, and he will also be in the description. And at 100 subscribers, with no videos, he will do the run. Now, let's get to the video at hand here. In the previous video, I turned a 1:30 trailer of Fraud into an hour-long insane rambling session, where I noticed things that people hadn't even thought of noticing before. And that goes into adding into my pride, of which I remain one of the most insane, if not the most insane, ULTRAKILL player ever. Now, this also included 12 photos of both 8.1 and some that were even also from 8.2. That was the first we'd seen of 8.2, but now we have a lot, and I mean a lot, more info in 8.2. So let's start with this photo. This photo contains the caption, "Despite everything, it's still you." Now, this actually originates from a small indie game that I'm sure not many of you have actually heard about. This game is called... So, leave a like if you've heard of this game. Yeah, okay, all jokes. Now, in Undertale, this is shown near the end of the game. It shows how far you've come from the beginning, how much you've changed, but yet, even though you've been through a lot, you're still the same person you always were. Very poetic. Now, that could be seen as very philosophical. However, let's think about V1 from ULTRAKILL for a second, shall we? You've killed and killed and killed. So, near our character's end of their story, it is still them. Still relentless, still hungry for blood, still what you will always be. But I don't really think that's the big meaning here. Just another Easter egg, especially given the fact that ULTRAKILL's official server has a dedicated thread channel for Deltarune spoilers when Chapter 3 and 4 came out. I mean, technically, Chapter whatever, 1 and 2. But still, it was there, and it was updated, and it was used when each of these chapters came out. By Hakita himself. Now, for what this may actually mean. This mirror explains a lot about the theme of 8.2, and I won't tell this to you just yet, but I'll see if you can figure it out yourself over the sections of these teasers. So, with that, let's talk about some more interesting stuff within this photo. First off, it's worth noting that up to this point, we have only seen a third-person version of V1, and that was in a secret level of all things. So, what makes this level different? Well, you'll notice that reflections have in fact been seen in ULTRAKILL, first appearing in 7S and then appearing over other levels after the revamp update. But we have never, ever seen your own reflection in ULTRAKILL. So the question now is this really you? I mean, it's not that crazy of a question to ask, right? We're in the fraud layer, the layer literally teased with the phrase, "Trust not your eyes." So, could this be a new enemy? Good question. I don't think we'll find this out anytime soon, though. So think of this as a possible enemy, just not one shown, kind of like the gutter tank with the violence layer. Now, what if I told you this wasn't the first time we've seen a mirror? Kinda. Don't believe me? Look at this clip. Did you catch it? Let me zoom in a bit. This, a bathroom. Now, what is this TV doing here? Or rather, not here. Here. Now, if this looks weird, it's because it is. Because I believe that this is either a mirror or lack thereof a mirror. Almost as if a mirror gimmick is being hidden. So, this is either showing the mirror or just hiding the mirror for later. Now, what you see is up to your interpretation, of course, but I just find it interesting that the first mirror in ULTRAKILL will appear in the fraud layer. Now, if we look at this room, it may look similar to a room that I went over before in my last video, that being this room. Now, what if I told you it's not this, because this is the actual photo from the last video? Do you know what this means? Well, this means that the room is backwards. So either this room isn't this room, or we have something happen to us in this level that makes everything go backwards. But anyways, this marks the end of everything that I gained from this teaser, so let's move on to the next one, titled Don't Look Up. Don't Look Up starts with V1 coming out of a tiny crevice, which seems to have maybe a cobweb or something as a decoration. This tiny area also has wood planks showing that it's the inner working in the walls fade too. But what happens next is quite interesting. Now, let's dissect and figure out what just happened, because it is a lot. But not as much as what's coming up later, so stay tuned. Upon entering the room, you are greeted by the floor actually being the roof. We can tell this from the lights that we've seen previously on the roof in other rooms now being present on the floor of this room. Upon moving forward, we see that many soldiers on the top of the on the bottom of the room, whatever, it's this part of the room. I'm calling this side A and this side B. Anyways, the soldiers on side B shoot towards the players from there. The player shoots two of the soldiers and then jumps on top of the wall to go upside down and shoots the last soldier. As we can see, these doors aren't real due to the handle being 2D, and even this one far away kinda seems like it's not a real door, but yeah. I'm assuming whatever is past this checkpoint leads to a door that will let you get out of this room. Another thing that I noticed are these pictures. If you remember the last video, I found out that most of these photos that were in 8-1 are covers from Bullet of Heaven. This one is the same as one of the pictures we've seen from the original Fraud trailer. This song is called The Wicked Cease from Struggle. But this other one, I can't tell. This is probably another Bullet of Heaven cover. But I also thought that it could be an album cover from World's End Girlfriend, from the album Heartbreak Wonderland. But alternatively, it could just be another photo teasing P-3, which, for the record, I'll be talking about more soon. But for the time being, if you have any ideas for what this photo could be, feel free to leave a comment, but on that note, there's not really a lot left to talk about with this room, other than the whole gimmick of gravity change will be present quite a bit in 8-2, and will help with my so-called theme of 8-2. Which is interesting because 8-1 only has one gravity change from what we've seen thus far. And you can't say that this is a gravity change because, as I explained in my last video, this is actually just something that forks to the left, meaning that this sequence is just a jump cut. But again, if you want more info on that, I just recommend watching my other videos, so I guess that's basically everything here. We can just go on to the next teaser, or rather, something that we've seen before. Here, I'll give you a hint on what it is. Now, normally I wouldn't go over songs like I am now, but I wanted to do that transition, and this song in specific is a little different. For starters, let's talk about the name. The name of the song is titled No Devil Lived On, which of course is another song reference like most other things in ULTRAKILL. This time from a song called No Devil Lived On, from a band called Ninth Evolution. Something fun I noticed here, which is 100% just a coincidence, is that the cover art for the song kind of looks similar to Providence. But anyways, the song from Ninth Evolution has some odd capitalization in the title, almost like it could be read a different way. But we'll come back to that. For now, let's talk about what the title actually means. The original Ninth Evolution song can be interpreted as a life that feels empty and detached from itself. It talks about being a copy of a copy where there's no time to feel or connect. It talks about how the self has been lost in the process of this, and there's no devil to blame as no devil lived on. Now, something that is worth mentioning is the description of this video. It says, work in progress of a song that plays in 8/2. Then states, composition is more or less done, just lacks recording and such. Now, as a song creator myself, I can say that songs can sound much different when they have recorded real instruments than when they don't. Here's a good example of that. Now, what that was the work-in-progress version of Death Odyssey, the song for 5-3, Ship of Fools. You can definitely notice a difference, right? Well, just know that the work-in-progress versions can be very different from the actual final result. So, I say this all because this song is very heavy in instruments, kinda like Death Odyssey, so I assume that it will sound a lot different in the future. But anyways, let's get back to talking about the title. This title is a palindrome. Now, what is a palindrome? Well, a palindrome is a word or phrase that can be spelled backwards and remain the same word or phrase. An example of this would be the word radar. When spelled backwards, it's still radar. So, what does this mean? Well, this is the final piece of the theme for 8-2. So, what is this final theme that I've been teasing this whole video? Well, it's quite simple, actually. Everything is backwards, or reversed, or something like that. The rooms go backwards, the gravity gets reversed, and even the song title is the same backwards as it is forwards. I'm sure the level title will also be the same backwards as forwards, like a palindrome, maybe something from Dmitri Martin's palindrome poem, like Damn It, I'm Mad, or even Evil is a Deed as I Live. It could be something like Never Odd or Even, and my final guess is that it could be ibophobia, the fear of palindromes. But anyways, let's move on to the song itself, specifically this part. Many people are theorizing that this part of the song is the part that will be in P-3. Kinda like the one part in Requiem also being in order, or like the part in Sands of Tide being in war. So, while we're talking about this, let's follow up on my promise about talking about P3. In my previous video, I talked about how I thought that this photo was something that's teasing the third Prime Soul. But as a comment pointed out to me, this is another Bull of Heaven cover. N. So, I guess that these photos are mostly just Bull of Heaven covers, unless they're something else, but they're pretty cool Easter eggs regardless. But I still do think that this will be the layer that will give us the third Prime Soul. So, who could that be? Still, no idea. But if we were to figure out this answer to that question during this layer, this would be the level to do so. We found out the most about Minos in the second level of the Lust layer. We found out the most about Sisyphus in the second level of the Greed layer. So, is this where we find out the most about our third Prime Soul? Maybe, but there are only 6 levels left in ULTRAKILL. 2 will be bosses, so 4 levels. There's this level, Heartbreak Wonderland, 8-3, and finally 9-1. Not to mention, the patterns aren't real, it could just be a coincidence, especially with there only being 2 so far. So, if Fraud is the layer of the Prime Soul, and each king before has made their own versions of their respective layers, who the fuck made Fraud? And how, with this non-Euclidean world, with its strange resemblance to the real world, what king was there when filing cabinets were around, when cars were around? What truly is this place? Is it a byproduct of hell? Probably. I hope so, because I don't want to imagine who made this place what it is otherwise. Do they even need to be a king? Because I've been wishing for Prometheus for quite a while, given that he has caused violence, committed fraud, not to mention treachery. Whatever. As long as Gabriel Prime isn't real, but as of right now, he's best candidate. I mean, Hakita has literally practically stated that the story isn't about V1, heavily implying the fact that Gabriel is the main character, showing how much he's changed over the game, but whatever, that's just a glimpse on how my mind thinks about P-3. It's a scary thought, honestly. So, let's just talk about this to get my mind off blind theorizing. This is the thumbnail of the video, as well as the only thing we see during the video itself. We'll get to what this means later, but just remember, all other recent songs for this game have the new enemy for the level. So, on that note, I think it's time to move on to the next teaser. So let's go over to This Office Job Drives Me Up the Wall. This teaser shows another room in 8-2. This time, the teaser is captioned, "This office job drives me up the wall," and it shows more gravity-defying areas. While we don't see our character defying gravity, we can infer due to these cubicles and carpet having some special gravity mechanics. You can also see that these filing cabinets are right side up, then sideways, then right side up, and it just keeps going on and on this way. Now, let's talk about what this thing is. At first, I had no clue because it kind of looked like a piston of some sort from this angle. Maybe this would be a control panel or something. But upon closer inspection, I figured out that this is probably just one of the desks like the one over here. It even has the chair, too. Something I found interesting is the fact that this vent is the one thing connecting all of these lights. But there's not that much more in this photo. I guess it is worth mentioning that it's possible that we can already be on the side of the wall just looking on the right side upside, but I doubt it because this door handle is on the right, which matches all the others that we've seen so far. Finally, it was around this time that we got this photo of a computer that's most likely going to be found in 8-2. Now, imagine if this was being shown as a mini-boss comes into view or something. That would be cool. But anyways, that's it for this teaser, so let's move on to the next one. And once again, it's something that we've seen before. And the time of this teaser is longer than the time of the original Fraud trailer. So if this video ends up taking an hour, just know that what's coming next is likely the source of that time. But what is coming next? Well, I told you. We have seen it before. Here comes the Deathcatcher. This is the biggest teaser that we've gotten by a large margin, so be prepared. This first room isn't one that we have seen before from what I can remember, but if you have any ideas, let me know. The next room has a couple new decorations, a fire extinguisher, and what looks to be a poster from something on the right, maybe? I'm not completely sure. Finally, this ladder was seen in 7-4 and the tutorial after the post-revamp update, if I remember correctly. Next, we switch gravity, then go to a new room, and this is when the real migraine begins. The setting is a parking garage with cars from the 30s. A few seconds later, filth, which is quite an odd wave considering how far we are to the end of ULTRAKILL. Then, after killing all the filth, the curtain goes up as if hell is revealing a cursed creation, almost as if expecting an applause. But by then, we notice what it is. A new enemy. Something which looks to be a torso with the heart taken out by its own spine. This is the Deathcatcher. But let's rewind. A curtain? Why would this be the case? I don't think we've seen this before out in ULTRAKILL enemy, or in ULTRAKILL anything for that matter. Is there any significance to this? Is it a creation from hell, or is it a creation from whoever made the Minotaur? Because this seems very similar to that in design, at least. An abomination which was beautiful to somebody, beautiful to the creator, but when presented fell flat to say the very least. Also, is the person who created the Minotaur the P3 boss? Because this first word is definitely king, meaning the king has 6 letters in their name. But I can't think of anything better to fit in this king space. So, whatever. Whatever created this most likely found it beautiful, so we could just keep that into accounting. Also, before we go on talking about the Deathcatcher, let's first talk about these cars. These cars keep with the setting that this whole level takes place in some twisted, gravity-changing version of a 1930s office. But a 1930s aesthetic isn't the only thing that these cars provide. Believe me or not, it brings a brand new mechanic. Here, look at it again, but this time focus on the car. I'm hoping that you saw the new mechanic, but if not, notice that there's an explosion on the car, and then we can see smoke coming off of it. Plus, it looks like the red car turns more grayscale, but it's easier if I put them right next to each other, so here, you can see the difference in colors. It only keeps around 25% of the original saturation, as we can see when editing the photo. So, enough with stalling, let's truly talk about the Deathcatcher. We've already talked about the Deathcatcher being similar to the Minotaur, but let's talk about what it does. The Deathcatcher is very similar to an idol of all things, meaning it can only be broken with a fist and remains still for the time it's alive. This is interesting because the idol doesn't actually count as the kill, but still counts as an enemy. So, will this be the same? Because it is another enemy that interacts with different enemies, but this is incredibly different from the idol, so let's discuss it. The Deathcatcher starts to interact with other enemies when the other enemies are pronounced dead. The Deathcatcher realizes that the filth are dead and starts charging up something. The heart starts pumping and it sounds like there's a winding noise. Next, we see a red aura go in towards the Deathcatcher, specifically the heart part of the Deathcatcher. Once it reaches the heart, a bright red light is shown for barely any time at all. Then, a dark red circle is released, this time away from the heart, and then we hear a familiar noise. It's 7-3, they created an enemy which doesn't even classify as an enemy. This was the puppet, but it's now known as question mark in the sandbox. But for simplicity's sake, I'll call this a puppet. So, what is a puppet? Well, it's an enemy made by the lore heavy trees of no sound, no memory. These were endless waves of enemies. That is, until the tree was filled with enough blood. Then they would stop respawning. These enemies are very interesting. Them being their own class, having their own setting to turn them into a puppet, and always left me wondering, will these violence exclusive trees be recurring through the rest of the game or not? But here is when I knew that we would not see those trees again, because puppets now have their own way of going forward into the next layers of ULTRAKILL. A bridge. And that bridge is the Deathcatcher. The Deathcatcher uses this shockwave to resurrect enemies, using their own bodies as a spawn point, so to say. This is where we can take a look at the description, where it states that these resurrected versions of the other enemies are a bit slower and weaker overall, kind of like the opposite of a radiant enemy. We'll talk about the other parts of this description, but for now, there's one more fact about these puppets that I want to mention. Earlier, I said that they used their original bodies as a spawn point of sorts, but I find that interesting because if a puppet dies somewhere else than where the real enemy died, it would still spawn from the body, which makes me wonder if they spawn a different place when the body is moved, or if it's even completely obliterated. Or maybe it just spawns from where they die, not where their body physically is, but yeah, it's always fun to see new or even rehashed mechanics, which is why I love the concept of fraud. Let's talk about some of the decorations in the parking garage. There's the cars we had previously talked about, but also a bunch of boxes on these rafters. However, I do think that we've seen this previously in another 8-2 teaser. There's also a fan over here, an elevator that even has its own control panel, which means we're getting an elevator in the game, but not a lift like the one in P2. This makes me interested in what the speedruns of Fraud will look like. I haven't exactly thought too much about it, however, I'm now left wondering what will happen if someone, let's just say, hits a gravity trigger while out of bounds or something. The speedruns are going to be so fun to both play for speedrunners like me.
Oh, I'm gonna nuts! I'm gonna nuts!
Hey! You can't say that! You can't say that!
Or people that watch speedruns. Like me. Anyways, let's move on to frame by frame. Let's talk about what we've already talked about first. We talked about the starting room, the filth spawning in, the car blowing up, the filth dying, the Deathcatcher's reveal, the filth puppets replacing the filth, and now we should be caught up. So, let's talk about the Deathcatcher's revive waves, because they're quite sporadic. Here are the timestamps for each revive wave that the Deathcatcher shoots out. As you can see, there's no patterns with the time aspect, so the only thing that I thought of was maybe that it was dependent on how many enemies, or puppet counterpart of the enemies, that were dead. And I originally didn't think that was correct, just because the third revive. But then, I listened closer to it. Because when this Cerberus threw their projectile at the player, it went past and most likely hit where the filth were, therefore killing them again. Then the next wave happened after the Cerberus stomped the filth puppets. It seems like the revive waves start the charge up when somewhere around, give or take, 2/3 of the enemies, or puppet versions of the enemies, are dead. Given that this is the enemy on the violent difficulty, it shows that this could be an enemy that scales with difficulty, unlike the idol who it shares many features with. But I think that's all for now, but let's go back because I accidentally let out a spoiler. The Cerberus. The Cerberus actually do tell us a bit more about the Deathcatcher. For one, the revive puppets can become enraged. We haven't really seen this before with the blood trees and all that. And also, that this is an evil room because the Cerberus will always be enraged. You see, if one Cerberus is killed, which, mind you, has to be killed to go forward in the level, then the other will become enraged. And when that one is killed, the puppet will become enraged. I hope you see what I'm getting at. This is an infinitely enraged pair of Cerberus. So yeah, it's bad. However, I'm sure it'll be fun. But anyways, after the player kills the first Cerberus, he goes up the ramp around the corner and comes out through the ramp that goes down, showing that this room is infinite. If you go up the ramp, you'll end up in the same room, but just from the other ramp which points down. And as we'll see later, it works vice versa if you go down. But moving on, we see the other Cerberus kill itself, then another revive wave, and then there are 2 swords machines that spawn, and this is the 3rd and final wave of this room. But this clip is still far from over, and that's because all the time that's left is just to fight the puppets and swords machines. But there is still a couple of things I want to talk about, so let's start here. This is what I was talking about with the ramps working vice versa. And here we can see the player blow up the car on purpose to help themselves. And another thing we can see is where the filth puppets spawn. It's always from the original filth body, not the place of death of the puppets, just like I mentioned a while ago. Only reason I mentioned it again is because we can see it more clearly now. Moving on, the player kills the final swords machine, dropping the incredibly reflective cage and allowing the player to break the Deathcatcher. It even gives the iconoclasm style marker that the idols give. Once the Deathcatcher is gone, the puppets die with it, and the clip ends with showing the elevator door open. But I can't quite tell what's in it. If you have any thoughts, let me know. But I don't think we can move on yet, because there's still a few more things I want to talk about with this clip, so just stay with me here. First, let's talk about the description, which I mentioned a little earlier. It starts by saying, Deathcatchers are a rare enemy that causes all nearby dead foes to get resurrected until it's destroyed. Now, what I found interesting here was the fact that it said it was a rare enemy. I guess just showing that it won't be shown much. And then it states that the resurrected versions are slightly slower and weaker, which is what we mentioned earlier. But there's one final thing in the description, and it states that as the dead stack up, their numbers can easily become overwhelming, which we were shown a prime example of in the teaser. It's also worth mentioning that currently, puppets cannot be sanded. If there is a sanded puppet, it dies. This hasn't really been a problem though, because puppets weren't seen in rooms with stalkers. But if Deathcatchers are in the Cybergun, this can now become a reality. So maybe there will be sanded puppets. The final thing that I want to talk about, or rather recall, is the song that we were talking about earlier. No Devil Lived On. Not that one, but this one, No Devil Lived On. Which, I was wrong, it's actually an album. And if you don't remember what I was saying about the theme of this album, it's about being a copy of a copy and other things. But now we can see that that is very similar to the Deathcatcher puppets. So, that said, that is the Deathcatcher. Now, it's time to move on to the next teaser. Or rather, the next level. That's right! It's time to move on to... Oops, I think I broke something. Dear God, we've made it. 8-3. 8-3 is similar to 8-2 in a few similar aspects from what I've noticed. The first similarity is the fact that we don't know the name of both 8-2 and 8-3. For the violence layer, we knew the titles of 7-1, Garnet of Forking Paths, and 7-2, Light Up the Night. So far, we only know the title of 8-1, which is Heartbreak Wonderland. The second similarity is the fact that both of these levels don't have any exterior gameplay from what we've gotten so far. And that includes from the time I'm writing the script, which is this teaser and the one that we'll talk about after. But now that I'm voicing this over, there have been 4 new screenshots that we will eventually get to from, I think, each level, but anyways. So far, the only exterior aspects in a fraud level that we've seen so far is in 8-1. The final similarity to 8-2 is the level itself. No, seriously, it's the level itself. 8-2 is inside of 8-3. It's not just 8-2 here though. There's a lot. So let me tell you what I've noticed. First off, there's what I was talking about earlier, parts from 8-2. A car here, the cubicles here, a vent here, a few more desk spaces, and even the floor V1 is standing on plus the roof consist of the parking garage floor texture that we were talking about recently. Now, moving on to the next part of the 8-3 furniture, I'm not sure what to call this, to be honest. Whatever, let's talk about 8-1 in 8-3. Wow, it's been a while. This staircase is interesting, but we'll talk about that later. There's the red wallpaper from 8-1, the green wallpaper, and some wooden walls or maybe some wooden floors, but I couldn't tell you which it actually is, but I would guess that it's a wall. Finally, see that there's the bathroom, which is actually from 8-1 near the end. But we'll go into each of these areas in much more detail later. So, that now finally leaves everything else in the photo. There's this area, which could be from 8-1 due to the similar style wallpaper from that level. However, it is something that we haven't exactly seen before, so we will most likely see it when Fraud comes out. But once again, I'll talk more about this section in a second. So, moving on from this shit, it's not an unknown factor. It is something that I actually know more about than Fraud. You may know more about this than Fraud. This is a door. However, it's not just a door. One act ago from this very level was one of my favorite levels in the game, Ship of Fools. I love Ship of Fools because of the song, because of the level itself, because of the setting. I just love it. So, going back to this, what is a door from Wrath doing in Fraud? I wonder what is behind this door. It could be more Fraud gameplay, but it could be also Wrath gameplay. And if that's the case, would it be new Wrath gameplay, or would it be old Wrath gameplay? Whatever is behind this door could even be a mix of Fraud and Wrath. But we'll actually talk more about that in the next teaser. So, let's go back to talking about Fraud. And Wrath. I find it very interesting the amount of similarities between Fraud and Wrath. Not just the fact that the door from 5-3 is in 8-3. Wrath's second level introduced the idol. Fraud's second will introduce the Deathcatcher. Wrath had a first look, Fraud had a first look. Even with the song Death Odyssey, it's pretty similar to No Devil Lived On. And Wrath had to follow up with Greed, a legendary layer, way ahead of its time. And Fraud will have to follow up with a Violence, a legendary layer, way ahead of its time. So much that it was the only layer not insanely rehashed in the Ultra Revamp update. Extending off this, we could talk about Greed and Violence. Greed had amazing, unique music to the layer. Violence had amazing, unique music to the layer. Greed had a dark third level, Violence had a dark third level. Greed introduced an interesting gimmick in 4.3, the torch, and Violence introduced the previously talked about puppet gimmick in 7.3. But that's just a couple similarities that I've noticed between Act 2 and Act 3 in general. Not to mention, there's probably a lot more that I'm just not even mentioning now, but I don't want to spend hours on this. So, let's go back to talking about the door, but also this door. There are 2 doors here, and also another potential third way out that I'll mention later. But the fact that there are 2 doors tells me that there's either a specific route, fake doors or routes, or finally, and the most likely, is that it's a double skull door. But it could be a fake door because fraud, of course, and there are many different ways out of this room. However, this one isn't a, at least generic, fake door from fraud because it has a 3D handle. The specific route could be because this door looks almost impossible to get into, that is, unless we are meant to come out of it. Like, we return to this room a lot, and for the double skull door, it doesn't actually show any indication of each skull like the other levels like that do. Now, let's finally go into more detail on each part of this. Let's start with the 8.1 side of the room this time. This red part of the room is not a part of 8.1 that we've seen before. Matter of fact, nothing in this room is something that we've seen before. However, decorations are seen. It adds an interesting Mandela effect, making us think that these have always been part of these levels. However, they are new. Or there is a chance that all of these parts are in 8.1 and 8.2, and it's just things that we haven't seen yet. But with this section specifically, it's worth noting that there seems to be a little glitch in the carpet, but I'll go into that a little later. The next section we'll talk about is the wooden part. It's not only another room that we haven't seen, but also another setting that we haven't seen. We've seen things that look like this wood in Heartbreak Wonderland, but never the wood itself. Again, like a Mandela effect. However, this time, there's probably a higher chance that it's just because we haven't seen it yet. Which seems like a good time to transition back to this, the checkered room. This room most likely mimics a 1930s kitchen due to the checkered floor and fridge. But what confuses me is the wallpaper, table, and random ass lamp in this section. It is interesting how each part of 8.1 that has a specific wallpaper has a whole different set of furniture that comes with it. Red is luxuriant, lavish, and green is a little more damp and congested. And this wood area is the dampest of all. I've realized that this white room has a bit of furniture shared with the green room. And it has the most homey feeling. So let's just say that this table is a dining table, but that makes this more like a house kitchen than anything else. It's also worth mentioning that almost this whole section is sticking out. You can see this back wall sticking out a lot, and even the floor looks like it's sticking out a bit. However, it's possible that the floor is just cropped at a weird place, as we could see a green colored tile next to the white one. We can't see this on the left side though, but my bet is that it's both raised a bit and just has the color on the side. We can't see the other wall, but we can assume it's sticking out because of the depth difference here. Finally, I only just realized at the time of making the script for the next part that this wallpaper is actually something that we've seen before. We have seen this setting for 23 frames in the Heartbreak Wonderland trailer. Matter of fact, I mentioned it in my last video. along with a new wallpaper too, a yellow one on the bottom floor, which is probably what the stairs here are connecting with. But the problem is that I thought it was a yellow wallpaper, either due to lighting in the room or in the background, but here it is. So I think that this white room is part of this green room, at least in 8-1. And that could be what is through this door in the first room of Heartbreak Wonderland. Let's move on to this green part. This actually tells us a lot, so let's get started. This is the only portion of the room that has a chandelier, but if you look back on the Fraud First Look trailer, you'll notice that the floorboards of the green wallpaper parts, or at least the non-carpeted sections, are these wooden planks, which are actually on the roof of this section of the room. This makes me wonder if the floor here is the same, the carpeted version, or the roof fall things. This also makes me wonder which side the gravity will be on. The chandelier side, couch and lamp side, or this wall. The final thing I want to talk about is the fact that there is a TV in this part of the room. But it's not the only one here, because there's also one up here. So why the fuck are there so many ways out of this room? 2 TVs, a door here, a rat door here, and then 2 more potential ways out of here that I haven't even talked about. Not to mention a part in the bathroom portion that we haven't even seen yet. So why are there so many ways out of here? I mean, I don't think we've seen this at all through the entirety of the ULTRAKILL campaign. So why are there so many ways out? Well, once again, I'll leave that for later. Hi! It happened again. I've been proven wrong in this room, because this wallpaper is different from this one, meaning that this side could be the floor, this could be the floor, it could be anything, honestly, but I don't believe that we've seen this wallpaper before, meaning that I could be right about most of this stuff. But there's also an incredibly increased chance that I'm just speaking out of my ass right now. I had previously thought that this was the room with the green vertical lines in 8-1, but now I've realized that this is a different texture on the wall, which is why I wasn't getting the damp, claustrophobic, and agoraphobic feeling that I had gotten before from 8-1. But with that, I think it's time to move back to something we have seen before. These bathrooms. Despite the color palette, this still isn't a part of 8-2, because we have seen this in 8-1. Near the end, of course, but still. The only time that we haven't seen this, near the end of the Fraud First Look, is near the almost end of the Fraud First Look. Kinda. You see the bathrooms here near the end of the gameplay montage. 2 things we haven't seen are the stalls, which we can now see, and the locker, or at least I think that's what it is, because it would make sense with the setting of this section. Also, the attention to detail here is insane, so much that we can even see a few little drains here too. However, I notice everything. So, why does this toilet have an antenna? I'm kidding. Obviously. It's a door, it's so obvious, of course. It sure would be insane if I spent 5 hours trying to figure out what this damn antenna was. But of course, I am all-knowing and would never make a mistake, especially one that would set mankind back 20 years. Anyways, where were we? Right, we were connecting this section back to the bathroom setting in 8-1. Fortunately, there's not much left to talk about other than the fact that this was an 8-1, except for this event. At least that's what I think it is. Which means that this is either yet another way out of this room, or a secret. And this is the main one that I've been teasing over and over. Although, there is a potential one that we may talk about later. But that is in the 8-2 portion of the room. Before we get there, there's one more section that I want to talk about. At first glance, it doesn't seem to mean much, but the more I think about it, the more that it shows itself to me. It's also possible that after 7 months of fraud insanity, I may just be losing my mind. So, with that beautiful transition, it's time to finish off the 8-1 part of 8-3. It's very poetic. We're finishing 8-1 and 8-3 with how we started. Back in red. Again, I told you it doesn't look like much, but let's look back to the top left. Remember that it looks like there should be something more here with the carpet, like it was cropped. Now, this could be for the whole glitch in the matrix aesthetic that the room brings. It could be a missing staircase so we can see more of the room, or it could be that this staircase moves around. This is what I believe will happen. I don't know how it will happen because it doesn't seem functional from a depth perspective, but if there is a place to fuck up your perspective, this would be it. This could be stated for most of the things in this room too. Things can move. As we'll see in the next teaser, this whole level just won't stay still. Which is why I think that this staircase will move as you progress through the level, like a self-moving staircase. And even if this isn't true, then mark my words, something will happen with this carpet here. But going back to the staircase itself, it seems to be connecting most routes in this room. If I was at a better angle, I would be able to tell what's going on, or towards the back side. However, this is the best we have. One way forks down into the green room. It also looks like there could be a way over towards the office, but it's probably not just because of the placement of this plant. Maybe it's just for symmetry, but who knows. It does seem like there could be something under where our character is standing. If this area was just even a little wider, I would have even assumed that there would be another door here for the 20 millionth time. But with that brings the 8-1 part of this teaser to a close. So, let's move on to the 8-2 section of this teaser, starting with the garage part. The garage part is on the ground that we're standing on, but also the roof. So let's start with the roof because there doesn't really seem that much to talk about here. The roof only has parking spaces, but no cars, at least from what I can see. Scaling to the wall, we see a couple dividers, and then come down to the foreground. Whereas the roof has parking spaces and no cars, this directly contrasts the ground, which has one car but no parking spaces as a turnout. I'm assuming that this car will be explosive like all the other ones in 8-2, but still, no guarantees. Next, let's talk about this area. Not really much new here. The cubicles are the same as before, and so are the lights, still visibly unique, but the same as 8-2. But what's interesting is the carpet, because connecting to this carpet is more carpet. Just leaving this little carpet cube, but connecting to the other side of this carpet is another section, this time looking more like the crowded rooms of 8-2, like this one. This other section is still part of the same section due to the carpet cube contraption. This section has a trash can, 3 little desk spaces with chairs, a water dispenser, and a vent, which I think has a chance of being another exit, even if it's a super small chance, which I believe it is. But don't quote me on it. There's one more decoration in this little section for what we can see, and that is the little tiniest bit of a ladder. The same one that we saw in the Deathcatcher teaser. Something else cool in this section is the fact that the wallpaper seems to follow around the whole section, which is pretty fun and part of the reason why I consider this whole thing to be considered one section. That is, all of the sections in full detail. However, I still want to talk about one more interesting thing within the aesthetic of this room. So, I'm going to take you to the arts of MC Escher. MC Escher makes these impossible paintings which seem to be very similar to Fraud, at least from an insanity standpoint, rather than a design or setting standpoint. However, if a design or even aesthetic standpoint is what we are looking for, I can't exactly give that. But I can give the next best thing. ULTRAKILL is produced by New Blood. New Blood also produced Dusk. Dusk is another game that is inspired by retro shooters like Doom, Quake, and more. The thing that sets the two apart most is that ULTRAKILL is more fast-paced and inspired by Devil May Cry. And as for Dusk, well, I'm not too sure about what Dusk is inspired by, so I'm going to go on and get to my point. There are 3 episodes in Dusk. The episode that we'll be talking about is all about facilities. But for most of the player base, it seemed like a certain mission stuck out more than the others. If you know, you know, which is ironic because I don't know. This level is the Escher Labs. The Escher Labs. If you couldn't guess from the name alone, this level is supposed to take a lot of elements from the paintings of MC Escher. It's only set up because of a vial making your character high rather than insane forces from what I know, but it makes everything seem impossible. It's not too fancy given that you're all on one gravity, but it will definitely challenge you and your expectations of the level itself. It starts with a super hot light mechanic, but before you know it, you're in a belly of the beast of sorts. Alright, this is an ULTRAKILL video. If you don't see what I'm getting at here, it's basically just a simpler version of Fraud. But from what I've seen, this level 8-3 is the most like Escher Labs. Of course, with Escher Labs, there's no gravity changes, at least in that mission. There's no visibly moving parts, no TVs you can go into, no growing rooms that you see grow. Overall, it has a lot less non-Euclidean shit and chaos, but it keeps the same mental trickery. I'd say, from a different perspective, the art of Escher may be more interesting, leading people to prefer the Dusk mission. But from my perspective, I prefer this chaos. But let's talk about why Escher Labs is similar to 8-3 from what we've seen so far. But I will be coming back to this topic later. This room is cluttered and has a bunch of different sections from a bunch of different places. But something interesting that I previously mentioned about Escher Labs is the fact that it keeps the same gravity on the character you play, but the level itself changes gravity. Like a staircase that is abnormally tall because it's scaled the wrong way. So this could be possible in this room because there is a lot more mobility in ULTRAKILL than in Dusk. So you can scale and parkour your way around this room more, potentially. This is especially possible due to the insane amount of furniture in this room, especially with the cubicles. However, just because there's a chance, you won't change gravity here. A chance, mind you. That doesn't mean there's no gravity changes in the level whatsoever. Matter of fact, the next thing we'll see, there is a gravity change right at the beginning. So, it's about time that we move on to that. Or those, or both. This is 2 places, 1 space. This is quite similar to the teaser, Don't Look Up. It shows a small new gimmick, and it's pretty short. But before I show you this, I need to introduce to you the Eugene research team. While voicing over the last clip, I decided to make a team of some smart friends who knew a bit about ULTRAKILL. And so, they've helped me to figure out anything that I missed in this teaser. So, without further ado, here's the teaser. Wow, another new song. This one hasn't been revealed in its own video like how No Devil the Dawn was revealed. However, I can tell that this song is a work in progress because of some evidence I'll provide later. But for now, let's talk about what's going on in this video. The first room definitely takes place in a bathroom setting from 8-1, but I don't think that this is the bathroom from earlier in 8-3. But it is possible that's where it is, just out of sight. But I really doubt this because the 2 sinks here are a lot closer than down there. V1 is also obviously walking on the wall of the bathroom, which doesn't exactly line up with the previous teaser if we stay the same gravity due to the floor and roof being so close. But of course, I could be wrong because this whole layer just does not want to stay still. Finally, you can once again see the previously seen exit sign from the Heartbreak Wonderland trailer. Moving forward through to the next room, we change gravity and see a familiar environment. The office from 8-2. While the environment is the office, the room itself is different. takes the form of a long hallway. There are 2 fake doors and 1 real door very far away. And that is when the familiar hallway transforms into something different, something unfamiliar. But I guess this is what I was expecting anyways, a yellow wallpaper, just not the one that I was thinking of. This unfamiliar environment takes the form of a grocery store, and not just a grocery store, a run-down grocery store. It's obviously destroyed, but you may wonder how I know it's a grocery store, and for that, I'm just gonna have to ask you to trust me on this one, and I'll explain it later. The grocery store setting takes over the space from in front of the player, replacing the office place setting as it goes along. It shows a few filth who only seem to be in the grocery store place. They cannot enter the office place. This grocery store has a ceiling tile sticking out and the floor dug up. As for why this place is so run down, obviously I can't tell you because I don't know. But this setting also gives us a new type of light. With the grocery store replacing the office place, it's also shown that the fake doors are disappearing with it. We can see a couple interesting things with the mechanics of this room. Somebody on the Eugene research team mentioned that the bloodstains don't transfer through the changes of setting. That is, unless the blood is in a free fall state. We can see that here, leading to the office to have blood in it despite not having any enemies. This also goes for litter. I noticed a few things myself too. First off, what I had previously said, that the filth remain in the grocery store setting. They cannot enter the office setting. And finally, the room has a limit of sorts, meaning that after the first setting change, the room can't be all grocery store or all office space. It never reaches this door or the one across the room. Now, just for some other miscellaneous thoughts to wrap this up. First, there are some shotgun shells on the ground, meaning that the player was either here before using the red arm, which is highly unlikely due to lack of blood, or the game engine just didn't reset the red arm shells from the last time the player was in this room, meaning that Hikita did this trying to record this before and then just restarted it and the shotgun shells were just there. Let's move on to the description, which asks, did you know that when the law of physics no longer apply, 2 places can occupy the same space? This is an explanation for what we see happening in this video. The law of physics don't apply to this layer, which we've known, but it hasn't exactly been confirmed until this point. Let's go back to the song real quick. How do I know that it's a work in progress? Well, it's very simple for 2 reasons. First, this song sounds like it's constantly in a combat theme, even when out of combat, which is exactly how No Devil Lived On worked in 8.2. The second reason is because Hikita stated that he didn't want to show another work in progress song, unless it needed to happen to keep the teasers coming out. While talking about this, he also mentioned that the song that we just heard from this teaser is his favorite in the whole layer, not only meaning that this will most likely be the best song, but also meaning that all other songs in the layer are already, at the very least, in a work in progress state. Now, one final thing before we go on to the next photos. What I want to talk about is completely hypothetical and probably won't even happen, but I did promise that I would mention it again. This relates to the Ship of Fools door in the first 8.3 teaser. Now, I mentioned that behind this door could be more fraud gameplay, but could also be some more Wrath gameplay. I also mentioned, finally, that it could be both fraud and Wrath gameplay. Now, taking into account the gimmick of this teaser, what if we were put into a similar scenario like this, but instead of the office space, it's a Wrath hallway, and instead of the grocery store space, it's a fraud hallway. The Wrath hallway has many enemies from Wrath, like the idols covering a sentry on one of the sides of the room with limits, or even something like an idol on the Wrath side of the hallway covering a fraud enemy like the Providence, or even a Deathcatcher, causing you to need to defeat the idol to kill the Deathcatcher to finally kill everything else in the hallway completely. Because it doesn't have to just be 2 places in one space, because it can also be 2 layers in one space. Now, let's finally move on to the reason that you are seeing this in 2026. When Fraud got delayed, it was bittersweet. I of course wanted ULTRAKILL to release Fraud because why wouldn't I? It seemed awesome with all the non-Euclidean geometry. Would it be confusing? Sure, but that doesn't matter that much in the long run. Just look at Violence. People thought that layer was confusing because of all the mazes and stuff. That layer turned out to be better than great. It was amazing. But while I was sad, I realized that this delay was necessary. And good for me anyways, because I was falling behind on this video. I was one of the people in the ULTRAKILL server, meaning I knew the delay was coming before the newsletter from Mr. Newblood himself. But when I did read the newsletter, I was amazed because it's really thoughtful. Like, super thoughtful. And if you just looked at it for the new Fraud screenshots, then I highly suggest that you go look back on that newsletter, because it's just really so kind of Mr. Newblood to write a thoughtful letter. Not just to the players, not just to the devs of ULTRAKILL, but to the devs of everyone at Newblood, and players of all of their games, especially because he wrote something that I wouldn't even come close to expecting from a game publisher of all things. But let's now get started talking about these photos that we got. This, I have reason to believe, is 8-4. So, instead, I'm going to first head over to the next photo. This photo brings us back to 8-2, and is kind of similar to the first teaser we talked about in this video. Despite everything, it's still you. This time, the teaser has 2 mirrors, one here, and one here. The interesting thing about this teaser is how dark everything is. Why is the office space so dark? And also, a question I really should have asked earlier, why does an office space have huge ass mirrors? Well, the mirrors of course fit with a palindrome theme, but why it's so dark here? No idea. I also realized that this isn't in the 30s. It's in the 90s. However, the garage is in the 30s, meaning everything in Fraud has a big chance to be from different time periods. So, here's what I have. The garage in the 30s, the hotel in the 50s, the supermarket can be a lot of time periods, and we haven't seen too much on it anyways, so for now just NA. The office in the 90s, and the warehouse is also in the 90s. Back to this photo, it's obviously the office setting and has office furniture like the desks, filing cabinets, and even the fire extinguisher. There's not too many new things here to talk about, but this is a pretty big room. And due to mirrors, we can see a lot of the room, like how behind V1 seems to be a desk, but with a computer on it, which I think could be where this computer comes from, if it's not scattered all over 8-2, which it most likely will be. To V1's left, while still behind, is a desk, but I think it could be a conference desk. The wall behind V1 is all just a bunch of filing cabinets. Finally, there's a door on the right here, right across from a hole in the wall here, which I suspect will let us go into the mirror, or at least the place behind the mirror. Now, it's also worth mentioning that Hakita mentioned that 8-2 and 8-3 are going to be the base levels in the game compared to the normal levels, but he hasn't yet compared their lengths to the encores. But that's about it for this photo, so let's move on to the next one, which takes place in 8.3. Well, it takes place in 8.3, but that doesn't mean that it doesn't have stuff from all over, because that's kind of the main theme of 8.3 as we've seen so far. It has sections from all parts, the office from 8.2, the supermarket from 8.3, or at least I believe that's where it was introduced, but it's possible that it was introduced in 8.1 or 8.2 and just hasn't been introduced in a teaser yet. But then again, I don't think it would be able to be introduced in a hotel or in an office setting at all, but I could be wrong. The next section is the bathroom. Then finally, back to the hotel. So let's go into a little more detail around each part. Of course, the office part has no furniture or anything at all for that matter, so we're just going to skip it. Moving on to the supermarket, which has a fridge, which is why I told you to trust me last teaser. So I wouldn't spoil this teaser and let you know this is a supermarket. However, this supermarket isn't actually run down. The lights are fine, the floor isn't broken, and the roof isn't falling in, which sets it apart from the last teaser's supermarket, which was very run down. I'd first thought that the fridge door on the far left had something covering it, but someone on the research team actually told me otherwise, because he realized that the texture is actually 3D, meaning that this is the wall of the fridge on the far left, which explains why the texture isn't the same over and over. There's milk on this area, but something orange and green here. Other than that, there's nothing new here. So let's move on to the bathroom area. Not much new here other than we can now more clearly see the locker from the bathroom in the previous 8.3 teaser. Oops, I think I broke something. Finally, there is the end of the room, the hotel. There are the curtains, which we have seen a bit of in the Lion Room from the Fraud First Look trailer, and the summer sale, which gave us many photos. There is a door at the end of the hallway, and finally, this. If you don't see a problem, make sure you really look at it, because this one is lit up, and the opposite one does not have the light on. But with that, it's about time to move on to the next photo, because I believe that we are all done with this. Next up is this, which I find very interesting for many reasons. First off, we don't actually know what level this is from. However, my bet is that it's in 8.1 for a couple reasons, which I will get into later. So again, for now, just trust me. The reason people think that this is on a different level than the, well, obvious choice is the fact that it's pink, like the sun is setting. Now, what sun? Is it this? Because I don't think that looks like a sun, and if it is, then how would it even set? Whatever. The fact is, people think that this is on a different level because this could be outside the office on 8.2 or even 8.3. Even some people saying 8.4. I doubt it will be there, and 8.2 and 8.3 haven't shown an exterior section once, so why would it be showing it at the end? I obviously have my own theory on this, which I'll get into later, so for now, let's talk about what's going on here. Despite what level it ends up being in, it obviously is an exterior section, which actually makes it the first one that we've talked about this whole video. Damn. We are surrounded by a bunch of buildings and a few new lights. Yay! There are also some trees over here, but what's really interesting is how it looks like you could be able to jump up here. However, it is a pretty high jump, and there's nothing really stopping the player from leaving if there are enemies here. I do have another theory of what's going on though, and it relates to this, the door, which is covered with rubble. However, you know what isn't covered with rubble? The water, which allows you to see a reflection of the door, which also isn't covered with rubble. Now, because of the way ULTRAKILL works, reflections work a little odd, but with Fraud, they're being updated quite a bit. But it is possible that this door is the door behind us, because while the light posts line up, the light on the walls here don't. Meaning that this door could be behind us. But I still think that there's a reason that this door has rubble and this one doesn't. It's possible that this one side is blocked off and you're supposed to fight whatever is here, then go back, but there's definitely going to be something odd happening with the reflections in this layer, so this may have something to do with that. Also, I made a bad recreation of this in the sandbox. It isn't great, of course, but it's okay. This is really all I have to say about this teaser for now, but we will be returning later because I've kind of cooked up some crazy ideas. So let's move back to the first photo that I kind of skipped over. This is 8-4, or at least I think it is. This is probably the way to the boss. Now, I believe this is 8-4 for two main reasons. Reason number one is because it's right under the progress report from Mr. Newblood, which mentions that they are working on 8-4. My other reason is a really big theory that I have. In this newsletter, we got introduced to 4 new screenshots. One from 8.2, one from 8.3, one which I believe is in 8.1, and this one, which would only make sense if it was introduced in 8.4. But that's not even the end of my theory. While on the newsletter, it was introduced in the order of this photo, the office photo, the insane hallway photo, and the outdoors photo. This is not the way it was shown on the announcement to the newsletter on Discord, because it was shown in the order of the outdoors photo, the office photo, the insane hallway photo, then this photo. In other words, 8.1, 8.2, 8.3, and 8.4, which goes along with my big "this is 8.1" theory. But now we should probably talk more about what's in here. First off, it's worth noting how similar this level looks to Prelude, which can mean two things. First, the more likely, Fraud is copying Prelude, as Prelude is completely made by humanity, as is all other Fraud things that we have seen. Like obviously the offices, supermarket, and hotels. And that leaves one place, back to Prelude, which is how we get into hell, starting with Limbo and getting all the way to here, Fraud. Now, why does it look like Prelude? Well, this can be for a couple reasons. There's a chance that Fraud has been mostly aging up as we've been going along, with this being the in-between period of the new piece and the extinction of humanity. Or another reason is that there is no real pattern and it's just Fraud is copying Prelude. Now, there is one more reason that this is actually similar and looks to Prelude, and that is, it is part of Prelude. The true one. Kind of. Let me explain. The Prelude is technically a facility from humanity, right? It was created so they could venture into hell, explaining the name, the Mouth of Hell. But this also marked the beginning of the Hell Expeditions, meaning that humanity has fully explored hell, meaning humanity could have gone through limbo, lust, and completely made their way through hell, all the way to Fraud. If it is true that this is 8.4, this means that it's the last stretch until the ending, also known as Layer 9, Treachery. Whatever is supposed to be in Treachery is supposed to be the most difficult, evil thing ever, as it will have the hardest enemy setup. It's going to be cold, most likely keeping many aspects from the cold section of 0E, and would be deserving of a final thing stopping you from entering it, the most unforgiving place in hell. If this is 8.4, that means that this would have to be protected, which would be the perfect time for one enemy, someone to give us the gold arm, which would have to be compatible with a machine like V1. Maybe this person is a mixture of machine and angel, or at least wields the arm of a machine, something either created from humanity and God, or something that is made from God, yet keeps a strong trophy from mankind, the God Fist. This enemy is the final check between us and Layer 9, or if it is an angel, then it's the last thing protecting Treachery. Now, let's talk about the things in this photo. There's a fan at the bottom which is being protected by these metal bars, like how most of Prelude is set out. There are 10 overhangs here, including the one that we're on, meaning this could be a way of showing the 10 Bolgias of Fraud, which is talked about in Dante's Inferno, which the game is based off of. So, I'm sure that they'll be shown some way in this layer, if not here. But that marks the end of the fraud delay photos. Not that much left now. So, let's begin with the end, which is another fraud song. Surprisingly, it's not from 8.3, and it's not from 8.4. Wait, what? Well, where's it from? 8.1? Wow, that is interesting. It's a multiple song level. I guess that would explain why this thumbnail has buildings just like 8.1. Hold on. Is it moving? No, it's not moving. It's just changing hue. Really interesting. Jeez, there's so much to talk about. Like, there's so much going on, I don't even know where to start. I guess I'll start by asking, when the fuck does this even play? Well, the obvious choice would be to say that it starts when we get to the exterior section. However, listen to the song. I mean, really listen to it. Do you notice anything odd? I'll give you a hint. Think about 7.1. Well, if you haven't guessed it yet, then this song sounds like it is in a constant combat theme until the end of the song, which is pretty odd. Now, I believe this could be because of two reasons. The first one is obviously it's a boss fight. It would explain why it seems to always be in a combat theme. So, what exactly could we be fighting? Well, the best choice so far seems to be the lion. I did a big section on the lion in my last video, but basically, I think he's going to be in this layer as a mini-boss. Or he could even be the final boss in this layer, but I seriously doubt that. There's not really any other thing that hints to a mini-boss in Fraud that we have seen so far other than this statue. But this is most likely supposed to be the final boss of Fraud, explaining the arm that's on the statue. Now, I did mention that there is another reason that this seems to only be in a combat theme, and that is if I'm wrong. Let's just assume that I'm wrong here, because if Exhibit A was the big average boss fight theme like Bull of Hell or He is the Light in My Darkness, this one would be pointed towards the encore themes, or more specifically, Apart Falling, or even Dead Heat Pulse. Now, why would this be? Well, because most of the things that were added in the Ultra Revamp update will be seen again. Zero-E ice physics are definitely coming to Treachery. The chandeliers have already been seen in Fraud, and he has been experimenting with what I like to call events in the songs. Starting with P2, coming into Violence, and then the encores. These are basically just songs that are triggered by an event like Tenebroso Sang, Dance Macabre, and more recently, the encore tracks. Think about how weird the tone sets would be if music changes were triggered in odd spots. For example, just listen to this. God, that was fun to make. But anyways, you get the idea. It just doesn't fit. Of course, Hakita constructs the songs for this game very carefully to fit each setting, so there is a chance that this song is not always in the combat theme. It could be going in between calm and combat. It just seems like it has a theme of insanity and complexity, but more on that in a bit. So just note that it's definitely meant to sound like it's always in combat. So now the question is, if it's not a boss theme, meaning it's an event theme, what is the event that triggers the song? Well, let's return to this, the cover art. As we can see, the rainbow gradient is moving, or something of the sort. But I can pause this rainbow gradient. Why is this relevant? Well, because I can change the hue of this pause screen to make it look like it's moving just like the original animated art, which shows it's not actually moving, but just changing the hue. Now, again, Elgin, Samuel, Eugene, low effort Barrick, why does this matter? Well, this has all been a reason to transition back to this photo. Because if we shift the hue down just a little bit, it's not exactly perfect, but it's pretty damn close to a reason why everything is pink. Because the level, like the cover art for the song, has a changing hue. Now, I know it seems like a stretch, but I'm not grasping at straws, I'm grasping at paper straws, far dissolved in not just water, but acid. When else can this song play if it's always in a combat theme? Or if not a combat theme, a panic theme, kind of like Dead Heat Pulse. Now, we talked about the effect, but what is the cause of this rainbow or hue shifting event? Well, I believe that the answer to that may take place in this building. I talked about this a bit in the last video, calling it Pandora's Box, because we don't really know what's inside. Well, I now have a few ideas on what is inside the building. And the first one is that it is something that messes with the hue of the level, explaining the pinkness of the fraud development update Heartbreak Wonderland photo. The other idea for what's inside we will get to later. So what would be the point of this change in setting? Well, it would sound a lot like Dead Heat Pulse, but would actually feel like a part falling, due to the fact that it would most likely just be some super hard enemy waves. However, there could be a time crunch kind of similar to, of course, Dead Heat Pulse or even the last phase of War Without Reason. There's also a chance that they would stick to the rainbow theme and bring back radiant enemies, but I doubt that because they are so far an Encore exclusive enemy type, even having their own tutorial. Now, let's talk about the music itself, specifically the complexity of the music. The song messes around with time signatures in a fucked up way, and honestly, this isn't new. Hakita has been doing this shit since Violence. I've been making covers of it, and oh my god, does it suck ass to work around. Anyways, the time signatures have been getting crazier over time, starting in Violence, going to the Encores, and then seen a bit in No Devil Lives On. And finally, it gets to here. It's definitely been the most present within Fraud though. Even in the 2 Places 1 Space teaser, we could hear some weird time signatures, which definitely matches with the complexity aspect of Fraud. It also seems to sound pretty similar to the song that played in 2 Places 1 Space, just angrier. But the instruments sounded the same, which is why I had to do a double take to see if it was really from 8.1, because it sounds nothing like In Absentia Logos. Next, let's talk about the thumbnail. It shows the buildings and trees, which matches the outdoors section completely. But what's interesting is how there's a little V1 in the middle. He's running with the shotgun out. Do not say that this arm is the golden arm because I mixed this arm with the feedbacker. But once someone from the research team showed me this, I finally realized that this is V1's right arm. Yet they parry with their left. Other people online mentioned that the art looks like a big eye, and a few on the research team backed them and said they could see that. I personally think that it looks a bit more like this shot, but I can see both. And honestly, this eye looks even closer to the ones we have previously seen in ULTRAKILL. Also, I completely brushed over the fact that, like, it's not just one color like all the other album covers are. Like, there's red for, I guess, Act 1 in general, blue for Wrath, yellow for Heresy, stuff like that. But this one is not just one color, it's many colors. And it's moving, which is hugely different from all the other ones that we've seen. Now, let's finally finish up by talking about the title and the description. First off, the title is Spiral Out, Keep Going, with the keep going being in parentheses. Spiral out meaning that we are, of course, losing control, and as for keep going, obviously it means keep going. But it is possible that it can be interpreted two ways, or even both. Keep going can, of course, mean the obvious definition, which is as if saying, don't give up. Or it can also mean the insanity, loss of control, or spiraling out will keep happening, like it's all downhill from here. Or it could be something or someone telling Fraud to keep spiraling out of control. But that's about it for what the title can mean, so let's move on to the description. The description states that this is the second song that plays in 8.1, Heartbreak Wonderland. It then goes on to mention that they had to delay the update, but they're trying their hardest to get it out without making it rushed like Wrath, Heresy, and even Gluttony were. This also seems to be a good time to mention the fact that the description for No Devil Lived On states that the song is a song that will play in 8.2, not the song that will play in 8.2. Meaning it's possible, and honestly likely due to the size, that we will hear at least another song in 8.2. And probably more than one in 8.3 as well. But with that, that is the end of the current teaser. So, let's move on to the next two. Wait, they don't usually come in groups. Weird. Before we get to this teaser, I'd like to mention that Hikita told the ULTRAKILL server that he was recording and mixing the instruments of No Devil Lived On, meaning that at least one of my theories in this video was true. The fact that no instruments were in the song, kind of like the Death Odyssey example I gave out previously. Yay. Also, Hikita hates the song now. Good luck, unnamed 8.3 song. These are the two photos that we got, and holy shit, it's gotten to a point where I don't even know what level this takes place in. It's either 8.1 or 8.3. So we'll just go over each one. But first, let me state what's happening here. This room seems to be using portal technology to make it seem infinite. For example, think about the lion room. Then just flip it over. And then we get this room. Now, just like the lion room, we probably won't be able to see ourselves under us. Therefore, you can't shoot yourself with a revolver. Tragic. Well, at least you can blow yourself up still. Anyways, I think this is a room with enemies just because I think it would be a pretty cool arena. But there's many technical questions that I have about this room. However, I will talk about that later. This photo came paired with another photo which is just like the first one, but instead looking up. We will, of course, go over everything here, but there is a lot. So let's go ahead and get started. Let's start by talking about when this would get a chance to show up. There are two levels in which this can show up. The first is obviously 8.1. It shares the same hotel-like theme, and also, as I previously said, this basically works as a vertical lion room. But of course, the other option for levels is 8.3, because it is mimicking the other levels like 8.2 and, well, 8.1. So it can just mimic the hotel and put it in this level. So where in 8.1 would this be placed? Well, there's still a good bit of 8.1 which doesn't exactly fit, such as this room, or even the room with the skull. Also, this painting is a Bull of Heaven cover. Anyways, this arena could take place inside Pandora's box. And then whatever is through this door will lead to the skull, and picking it up will trigger the second song of the level, kind of like, do I even need to say it? Apart falling. I'd say, at the very least, it probably shows up after we get to the outdoors due to the fact that this wall is from the exterior section, like the wall of a building. Now, when could this show up in 8.3? Hell if I know. We only have one video of 8.3, and it's a random ass hallway, not even mentioning how this is supposed to be one of the longest levels in the main game. So there's truly not a single idea in my mind of when this can show up. Also, I watched the video from Taco Smoothie, which is basically just this whole entire video in just like 6 minutes. He mentioned that this photo that I called the 8.4 photo could be in 8.1 right before we fight a mini-boss, which is just a cool and very plausible theory I wanted to point out. Anyways, it's time to point out some technical questions about this room. Most of these questions will also go for the lion room too. Question 1, what if I shoot a, let's say, core eject down this hole, or even a rocket? Will it keep going? What about a coin? Is this an infinite coin hole? And if not, does it just keep falling? Then I could still use it anyways. Question 2, what if I whiplash an enemy to the middle? Do they keep falling forever, or are they just dead? Question 3, what if I parry a projectile and send it down? Will it just keep going, or will it stop? Is it like even possible to parry it again? Question 4, if the enemies loop so it's the same enemy up and down, will it shoot me if it's above or below, or will it just shoot me forward? Question 5, if I go to the cheat menu and turn on invulnerability, and then start shotgun pumping and core nuking myself down, have I created an ULTRAKILL particle accelerator? Question 6, if I put a coin above me and use my jackhammer core shot under me, will it hit the coin? Question 7, if I throw soap down the hole, will I see it again? Question 8, what if a Maurice falls down the hole after death, or even a gutter man? Will they keep going? Question 9, can you whiplash an enemy under you if you're above? Okay, well, there's not much left to talk about, so let's talk about decorations. There's fake doors, 2 tables with chairs, a chandelier, and some Cerberus statues. We've seen all of these from the fraud first look. The setting is, of course, the red, luxuriant hotel from 8.1, but it also keeps the windows from the buildings on the exterior section of 8.1. Looking up, we see it's the exact same thing, but going up. Although shooting a saw up to knock down the chandelier will probably shoot it down from this end. If not, then there are infinite chandeliers, which would be pretty sweet. But with that, that's the end of this teaser, and wow, it's the end of the video too. Well, it's been quite a ride, but alas, we are at the end. If there are any more fraud teasers, I'll make sure to get right on that in shorter form videos while still focusing on the teasers going into a lot of depth. If there is anything I missed in this video, make sure you leave a comment, or even if you have any theories that you want to share, leave a message down below. You can even leave some suggestions down below, whether it's editing advice, writing advice, or even ideas for a 600 sub special. A big thanks to everyone on the Eugene research team for helping me out with this video. The people with the white names on the left, you can support by subscribing to them even though they don't have any videos. Their links will be in the description. If you want to watch my Twitch for when Fraud comes out to see my live reaction, that will be in the description. And if you like this video and haven't checked out my 2 other videos on Fraud, make sure to check them out here. And finally, make sure to subscribe to Cade so I can get into my main category, 100%. Anyways, this has been your Fraud Man, Insane Guy, Low Effort. Thanks for watching, sub if you want, cause I don't have a sub goal yet, and if I don't see you again, have a good Fraud release. Goodbye.